the Living Vertical Adventure Photo Show. This is a Friday night live stream, and what I hope we're going to do here tonight, just talk a little bit about photography, a little bit of Q&A. I want to start off this live stream first by telling you a little bit about some of my first impressions of the Fuji XE3 as I have been shooting some night photography with it over this past week, and then once I kind of give you some thoughts about that, I'll be happy to take Q&A and start addressing you guys that are coming into the live stream here. But I want to kind of start things off first with that. I also want to say up front that I don't have a lot of time tonight on this live stream. Typically I hop on here and do these live streams for quite a while on some instances, but tonight I actually have a psych paper that is due at 11:59 p.m. and I'm gonna have to get back on that and finish that as my semester is coming to a close here. And it's been kind of a wild ride for me because I made a massive career shift going from filmmaking and photography as a profession back to school to become a nurse. And good evening, King Yuzi. With the goal of being able to, of course, have more free time and financial freedom to be able to, be a little more selective in the creative work that I do. And so that's why I'm kind of in this position where I'm doing schoolwork at this point in my life yet again. I want to talk a little bit about the Fuji XE3. You can see the thumbnail for this chat is one of the images that I shot, which ironically, is just shot in a field back behind my house. And one of my friends on Instagram, who's seen all of my body of work that I've done over the last 5 or 6 years, much of which I've had to travel to the far corners of the earth, climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and be all in these fairly extreme environments and circumstances to pursue these pictures. And he said his favorite picture that I've ever taken is that one that is the thumbnail on this live stream. So all of my years of climbing and effort and traveling around and trying to get those, going to those extreme places to get better shots, turns out really it was all just preparation for the field behind my house the other night. And let's just talk a little bit about image quality first with the XE3. It's really splitting hairs. I don't think anybody can realistically tell the difference between the XE3, the X100f, and the XT2 or XT20. I think pretty much for the most part the image quality in all of these is going to be consistently really good and really clean. The thing that I was actually more concerned with, and to be fair, just to qualify that statement, the difference in image quality that you're going to see between any of those cameras is much more likely to have to do with the lens and the settings that you're using with the specific lenses than it is with the actual camera itself. So I had pretty high expectations in terms of the image quality, and I would say that I'm not disappointed. I will say one caveat that as good as these little Fuji cameras do with low light, they are definitely not magic. I mean, you really do need to make sure to I felt like these files, I don't want to say fell apart quicker, but that there was, I guess, that the range for where you could kind of enhance the exposure in post seemed a little bit more limited from what I remember working with the XT2 a few months back. And so I don't look at that really as a limitation. What I really tried to do was shoot more with lower ISO. I guess that's really what I'm trying to say, is that if you're shooting with lower ISO, in order to get the noise down, you have to get the exposure pretty close in camera. So rather than shooting, underexposing significantly and then trying to pull a bunch of exposure out, if you try to do that at a low ISO, then, and if you can't keep the shutter open for long enough, then that becomes problematic, and it starts to get noisy. On the other hand, what I found is that by just increasing the ISO and opting for more manageable shutter speeds, the image quality was still really, really superb. And I even took a couple of shots at 51,000 ISO just for fun, and 51,000 ISO, yeah, it is really grainy. And I am going to do an entire video that is just a deep dive into night photography with this camera, but I wanted to touch on some of my first impressions while they were still in my head. A couple of other things too that I want to mention is that the performance is really one of the things I was more concerned about with the XE3, and frankly that, you know, given what I've done with the X-T2 and all these Fuji cameras, I was really more concerned about, would the touchscreen hold up, would it work in the cold, and how would the touchscreen at all have any real impact on what I was doing with my shooting. Now, when I went out to shoot the other night, I was using, for like the first half of my shooting, I was using a manual focus vintage lens, so there was definitely an opportunity for things to get really fiddly. And the good news is that the touchscreen actually was, I was skeptical. I did not think that this would be the case, but being able to use the touchscreen made it really really comfortable to use a manual focus lens, because zooming in, instead of trying to, you know, in the dark feel around for that knob, and again, it's not a huge inconvenience, but being able to see what you're doing and everything being on the screen that is lit up, it makes any interaction with that much easier because of the fact that it's already backlit, so you don't have to get out a light and shine it on the camera, or, you know, feel around and push the wrong buttons. And if you've done this stuff before, you know how irritating that is, even if it only takes like 10 extra seconds when you push the wrong button and it takes you into the quick menu when you're trying to punch in to get a, you know, a focus check on what you know, the star that you're zoomed in focused on. Super annoying when that stuff happens. Well, using the touchscreen, because it's backlit, it is sort of intuitive, and it solves a lot of those problems because everything that you need to work with is already lit up right there in front of you. And being able to use the, you know, I have the zoom in motion, or the focus, the manual focus check as the down swipe, and just being able to use that made it very, very simple, very intuitive. And I was very surprised because, to be honest, I was a little bit skeptical of the touchscreen for still photography. I mean, I thought it was a nice option, but I've always used touchscreen more for video with the Panasonic cameras, and so it really surprised me. It really stood out to me. The other thing that I was very surprised about positively was that the battery performance was good. Now, I want to qualify that by saying that none of the, you know, these little mirrorless cameras, with the exception of the Panasonic GH5, which I also have and I love, not so much for night photography because, you know, it's a little bit smaller sensor, harder to make clean exposures when you're doing anything that you have to put on a tripod for long enough shutter speed that requires a tripod. The GH5 is a little bit hard to make clean exposures, but, or at least relative to the XE3. But the battery life did not significantly deteriorate, and this was, you know, high 30s, low 40s, so it's kind of hard to say what it would do if we go down another 20 degrees, and I'm going to be testing that either ice climbing in upstate New York this, well, hopefully in a couple of weeks, or I might even be able to get out to Alaska depending on what my schedule is like in like early in 2018. So either of those would give me a really good opportunity to test out how the XE3 does in really cold conditions. But I would say that the battery life is still comparable to the X-T2. And you know, I would say it's good, not great, but it didn't get significantly worse in the cold, and that was really the thing that I wanted to see. Does the battery life just, you know, deteriorate significantly when it's cold? And so far I would say that no, at least not in the upper 30s, it didn't. Another question that I got from somebody, and I don't know if, I believe it was a lady who asked me this question, because I feel like I don't have a lot of ladies that watch my channel, and so I tend to remember their questions a little bit more. But I was asked if the touchscreen worked well in the cold, and again, I can only give you an answer down to 38 degrees or so Fahrenheit, but I can tell you that the touchscreen really, really worked very well without any hesitancy, any issues, you know, in the responsiveness, at least no difference in the way that it would normally respond from the warm weather. So those things are all very preliminary. I will grant you that, but I would say that it is very very encouraging, at least to me, to be able to see image quality coming off this that is super, super, super nice. And even, you know, up to 6400 ISO, being able to make really nice looking, clean exposures. It's really good. But, you know, having a little tripod makes a big difference, because if you try to handhold at a faster speed, and I did some tests just to see, like, if I shot at a handheld speed that I was comfortable with, like 1/60th or 1/25th, and just like turn the ISO way up, and, you know, did a few other things, and like to see if just how far I could kind of salvage things in post. The answer is, you know, get a tripod, and it is worthwhile to have a cable shutter release. I have one that is like a micro USB. The shutter release, electronic shutter release cable, it goes in here on the side. If I can get some light in there, yeah, it goes in there on the side, like in the, I guess it's a micro HDMI. No, it's the micro USB port in there on the side, and then that way, the alternative, of course, is you could set it up with a, you know, little self timer. Just push the button, make sure everything is in focus, and walk away. But my first impressions of this, and I am going to do a full video more where I kind of go into Lightroom, pixel peep a little bit, and put a little more comprehensive analysis behind all of this. But my first impression is that shooting night stuff with this is that it really, really, really is a treat to use. And so far, I'm just incredibly happy with the XE3. Very glad that I got it, and it does seem to be pretty darn close to everything I would want in a stills camera. And I am still going to be doing a video on the video function of the XE3, but that's going to be upcoming. So anyways, sorry for the long rant. I just wanted to make sure that I got the meat and potatoes out of the way. And now I will go back in the comments. Hello to everybody who is here, and thank you all for joining. Let's see, Dave D asks, thoughts on having a fixed lens camera versus interchangeable lens. Fixed lens versus interchangeable, you know, as it relates to the Fuji anyways, you know, the X100f versus the XE3. I love the X100 cameras, but right now I have the 100f, I have the XE3, so I'm actually making this choice right now. And honestly, the only reason it really boils down to touchscreen versus ND filter on the 100f versus the XE3. And I love the ND filter on the 100f, but besides that, if you put a 27mm lens, this little pancake guy, on the XE3, it's actually smaller than the X100f. I have an 18mm f2 on the way that is not quite as small as a 27, but it's pretty small, and will also give it a similar size profile. Again, the downside with the interchangeable lenses is that you have, you know, you don't have the ND filter built in there, but you do get the touchscreen capability, and the touchscreen is really, really nice. It works really well, and it is surprising, because I was definitely skeptical of how much that would actually help for still photography, because I kind of got used. Oh, and today I was actually even using it with gloves on, because I just wanted to see how cumbersome it would be with, like, well, I have them right here actually. My gloves, they're liner gloves. You know, so they're thin gloves, but using the XE3, and this would apply to the X100f too, it works really well even with the gloves on. But yeah, really the only major advantage that I can see with the X100f is like the leaf shutter. If you use that for flash photography, some people may like the design, the handling a little better. You may like some of the extra buttons, but you know, at the end of the day, comparing these two cameras together, it's really hard to say that there's an advantage other than the ND filter to the X100f. I mean, personal style counts for a huge amount, and I fully appreciate the value of not having to make decisions about lenses, having one lens and you go out and shoot with that, and that's your camera. And if you feel that way, then the X100f absolutely is outstanding. I don't think you're missing anything by not having it. The question is, what is it that you want? I feel like the 100f, the 100T, those are cameras for photographers who know. In other words, if you've reached a point of maturity in your career, and you're able to simplify, and you've transcended gear acquisition syndrome, which some of us apparently have not, and you're able to go out there and say, this is what I want to shoot, this is how I want to shoot, I want super simple, self-contained. That fixed lens camera is, you can make awesome stuff with only that combination with only one lens. If you're gonna, if you want to have a little bit more room for experimentation and you're not 100% sure, or you're newer to photography, I think that the XE3 or something like the XE3 makes more sense, because you have more opportunity to experiment and to figure out where your style sits. I personally, I like both. I think there's advantages to both, but for me right now, the 100F is more of a luxury item, and whether or not I keep the 100F into the new year is going to depend on if I can afford a luxury, as opposed to that being my one and only camera moving forward. And it was my one and only camera for several months, and I enjoyed it. But I also enjoy the XE3 too. So good question, tough question. I actually have a video in the works specifically about the 100F versus that. And yeah, agreed. Just kind of scrolling back in the comments a little bit. Thank you, King Uzi, for the love on the photo. Appreciate that. And I totally agree. Most of the cameras these days take good photos. If you spend a decent amount of money on a camera, it's hard to get something that looks bad. Bad lenses can still be had, and bad lighting is very, very easy to come by. And you can always make a good camera look really shoddy if you don't, do everything properly. Good evening, Eddie. And let's see, we have Scott Peterson here. Good evening, Scott. King Uzi again. Using cameras long enough, it becomes muscle memory, all the gestures and buttons. Yes, that is generally true, and that is good reason, for shooting at night. That's a good incentive to stay with one camera and not switch up all the time, although that's, that might be a shortcoming that I have. Just B-roll asks, when connecting an external microphone, is there a manual setting on the camera to reduce the internal microphone level to decrease the hiss from the internal amp on the camera? And I'm assuming you're asking this about the XE3. I do not think there is, because there was that on the that did exist on the XE2. So let's see, we have movie modes, autofocus modes, output, HDMI, mic, remote release, no. It does not look like it, and I didn't see it before when I was going through the setup, but there's nothing in the movie menu that does anything with that. So I'm not going to sit here, or I haven't gone through, and it probably would not be time efficient for me to literally go through every single menu point, but it's not anywhere in the movie mode. I'm pretty much going to go through everything here. If you'll forgive my lack of eye contact here for a moment, no is the answer. So there is not a at least not that I could readily find in anywhere in the menus. And people always tell me when I miss stuff, which is one of the reasons why I do these videos, is because I'll say I don't think so, and I'm very hesitant to ever say no, because every time when I think I've looked through everything, then somebody comes along and is like, oh yeah, well, it's just like this secret handshake. But in the video menu for the XE3, there is no mic level adjustment. It is definitely not made with the intention of being used as with any serious intent for video purposes. Although I think the autofocus on it is good enough where it could be used for B-roll, but in terms of audio, it has that 2.5mm little squirrely jack where you have to get an adapter for it. And the video quality actually does look really nice. I've only shot it in 1080 at this point, but you know, those film simulations look really sweet. You know, I love being able to have all of that in camera, and it's a nice trade-off. And I think I may try to use it more, even though it would definitely limit the way that I shoot, to not doing handheld stuff, because obviously without the image stabilization. But you know, it's definitely clearly, that's one of the areas where they really handicap the XE3 in relationship to the XT2, is definitely on the video side of things. They definitely knocked it down a few pegs. Hey, good evening, Tiff. Thank you for the love on the beard. I appreciate that. This is literally the first time in my life when I've put this much, well, I shouldn't say time and effort. It's more just not bothered to groom my, well, I shouldn't say that either, because I have actually tried to groom, because rather than cut the mustache, I started like brushing it and putting, you know, beard conditioner in there. Never thought I would go to that level, but that's as involved as I am right now, and it's nice because it's like a way that I can do a little self-improvement while not having to do anything physically active or leave my house or deviate from just going to school and back every other day. Which pretty much I've been chained to the computer and going to school constantly, and then now studying for finals this week, which you'll all be very proud to know that in addition to buying cameras, talking about cameras, and you know, lusting after cameras, I have maintained a 4.0 average, which it looks like, if I don't screw it up, if I finish my psych paper by midnight tonight after this live stream, I will have a 4.0 average for this semester. So you know, pretty cool to see that coming together. Definitely not something that is typical for me. I've always been a solid B- student. And my motivation has been very high, and honestly a lot of that motivation is thanks to you guys who've been here as part of this channel with me. It really means a lot. And then of course editing, I've been doing the first episode of the Banting's Ghost documentary project, which I just dropped today, and you should all check that out if you haven't seen that already. I'm very proud of it, very happy with it, not because it's like the best thing ever, but because I feel like I was able to create something that really I was happy with without really having a very solid plan going into it, because I was kind of freaking out when I was shooting it, just feeling like I don't, you know, like this is the biggest thing I've ever tried to take on in a documentary project, and what if I screw this up and I'm just going to kind of run around like a chicken with my head cut off and shoot everything, and I only had 2 days to shoot with my friend Andres, and hoping that I wouldn't get too much or the wrong things, and like it all kind of came together as it usually does. And my first real serious thing of any length that I've shot with the GH5, and I'm very happy with that. So that's done and out of the way, so I'm starting to kind of like knock these projects off, and of course I still have a bunch more videos that I got to do about the XE3, more testing and all that stuff, but that's kind of like dessert, because I love doing that stuff. I mean, I like doing the serious documentary projects too, you know, but let me see here. Just B-roll, give me 3 seconds, I'll get to your question. King Yuzi asked, would you say that the XE3 is the most compact mirrorless interchangeable camera? Are there any smaller ones? I believe that interchangeable mirrorless, and I know somebody's going to correct me on this, so I'm going to say what I think, which is that I think that the Ricoh GR, one of those manifestations of the Ricoh, might be a little bit smaller than this. If it is, it's not much, but I want to say this is in the same ballpark as the Ricoh GR, and I have held the GX85 by Panasonic, and I would say this is also very comparable size-wise. Like the GX85 is maybe a little bit lighter. Hey, good evening, Daniel. We got Daniel checking in. Hey, Daniel. And let's see. Ookie Man. Good to see you here. Lumix GM5 is the smallest. GM5. I am not familiar with the GM5. That may be. Hey, Chris Holiday. Good to see you here. Seattle. All right. I'm not sure if the GM5 is new or old, or if I am just not familiar with a name that might be different in the EU. But I'm not familiar with the GM5. Wouldn't surprise me if there are smaller manifestations. I mean, being perfectly honest, I actually don't have my RX100 here at hand to gesture with. This is my gesturing camera of choice for this evening, and I would say that this camera is, like, I don't think that, for me, if they made this camera any smaller, it would be too small. I mean, this camera is small enough that my 3-year-old daughter, and granted, she's got meat hooks. I mean, she's got big hands for a 3-year-old, and huge feet, which keep getting bigger too. But she can hold this camera, I wouldn't say comfortably, but she can get her hand around it and she can make it work. Thank you, Eddie. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm feeling better than last week, although I actually had a cold in the interim time period, but I'm a little bit less tired and a little bit less stressed because I got that documentary project out the door yesterday night. But yeah, if they made this camera any smaller, it would be, for me, it would be too small. When you put the 27mm lens on here, I mean, this thing just becomes really tiny. You know, like, this is a little, you know, this is not that different in size from the RX100 Mark IV that I have. And this is like very, I mean, this isn't like, you know, shirt pocket, but this is very easily jacket pocket. And, you know, if you have, depending on what kind of pants you're wearing, very easily, like, you know, back pants pocket, like in some cases. Let me see if that's actually true or not. Okay, no, I lied. I would not try to put this in my pants pocket. That would be a terrible idea. Don't do that ever, unless you have like Jenko jeans. For those of you who get that reference from my generation, but I would say that jacket pocket very comfortably with the XE3, and I think it may be possible to make a smaller combo. But my understanding, and again, this is my opinion, I don't believe there is a smaller interchangeable lens system that has higher quality or even comparable quality to the Fuji XE3. So best value, smallest package, and highest image quality for all of those things combined, I would say the XE3 is probably right now at the top. And of course, size is, like I said, size is a relative thing because, you know, it's not like it would get better if they made the camera any smaller. So, let's see. Just B-Roll asked, do you have any extra info or opinion on the rumored X-H1 or the X-T2S video-oriented 4K with IBIS? 24 megapixel APS-C, 5-axis IBIS, 200 megabit per second bitrate, etc. Ah, boy. That's a good question. You know, I looked at that. Honestly, it doesn't tempt me. I mean, I'm sure it will tempt me. It looks really nice, and here's why. At least not at this point. So maybe when they have the X-H2 or 3 down the road, it might be a little bit more tempting. But part of the problem is that with video and with IBIS, you're introducing a lot more, literally, moving parts to the camera. Their IBIS is not going to be able to work with OIS lenses, and, you know, like, this is at this point, looking at Fuji doing this, I think that they are going to get where they need to be. But for my money, the Panasonic GH5 is already a variety of steps ahead of them. In many different ways. I mean, they already have like the, you know, the Cine 4K, the 60p 4K, as well as 120 frames per second in HD up to 180 frames. They have all the different graphs and the grams and the scopes and all of that stuff built in. There's the in-body log. There's the battery life that is like impressive, that is comparable to DSLR. And there's just so much that the GH5 does, plus the integrated IBIS with the you know, making use of the lens as well as the sensor stabilization. And they've done that over so many different iterations that the GH5 is like, it's pretty polished. In other words, it's kind of like the difference between the X100S or the X100 versus like the X100T or F. And I have something in my mouth. There we go. Yeah, so with all of that said, I think that in a couple of iterations, they may really, really land on something good. And I mean, it's very possible that they will hit it out of the park. Hey, Randy, good to see you here. And Tiff says has to walk away. Dog's having issues. Oh no. Yeah, so I think that that video Fuji camera. Let me put it this way: I'm skeptical that Fuji is able and willing to commit to video users the way that they have committed to still shooters. And part of the reason why you have the group of people that are militant Fuji lovers is because of the fact that Fuji is the one camera company that has been really like, we are photographers camera company, and if they're really going to make a good video camera, there are certain things that are going to require them to step away from that ethic of being photo first. And like I doubt whether or not it's possible to make a camera that is going to make everybody happy. I doubt whether that's possible, and given that reality as I see it, I doubt that Fuji is going to be able to pivot in that direction away from its core audience with the angry photographer and his ilk who are just like, oh, who cares about video stuff? Like, whatever, video sucks and it's stupid. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like the people who would never even touch a GH5 because they don't shoot video, and so they only think about it, they're kind of like from a stills only perspective, and that has been Fuji's market typically, and Fuji has been very loyal to their fan base, and so because of that, yeah, color me skeptical, but I would love it. I would love it if they change my mind. I just think that I don't think they're going to be able to just throw in IBIS into a camera and expect it to just be like, for people to start comparing it to the GH5. The GH5 has really been refined and through a loyalty to video shooters. Same thing like with what Fuji did, that's what Panasonic has done with their GH line. And I think that, Fuji has always been, it's like video shooters for Fuji have always been like the side relationship. It's like, this is my, the video shooters are like Fuji's mistress, where it's like, we don't really want anybody to know that we're seeing you, so we're going to try to keep it on the DL and just give you some features, some scraps on the side, but nothing that's going to outwardly indicate, hey, we're going all in for video. And like, they're kind of flirting with it with the XT2 a little bit, which is the reason why I'm like, hey, I'm not going to be your side hustle here. Like, I'm a video shooter. This camera has video features. Make a good video camera if you're going to put video features in it, or don't even bother with it and just be real about it and say, hey, we don't want video shooters. But they've been kind of riding that line for a little bit, and it takes more than IBIS. And I mean, Fuji has beautiful image quality, but there's so much about the details of the way that a video camera needs to handle that Panasonic has utterly nailed down, that Fuji has just seemingly been not comfortable with, and that most of their audience are not comfortable with too, and that's kind of the big thing. Let's see. Randy, finally got your Fuji camera. What did you get, Randy? I am keen to know. Suresh asks, any advice on 80mm micro lens? Suresh, I don't know anything about the 80mm micro or macro. Is that a macro lens, I'm guessing you might have meant? The 80mm macro lens, I have not shot with it. There's a lot of lenses that I haven't shot with, and the longer lenses for Fuji are the ones that I have not done a whole bunch with. Although I am personally very interested in the 90mm lens at some point. I would like to get that and play with it. Most of the lenses that I have in the telephoto lengths are are vintage lenses. They are not actually Fuji lenses. So I have the Fuji lenses that I currently have. I have the 23, I have the 27, again on the wider side, the 16 millimeter 1.4. I have an 18 millimeter on the way because I want to try to marry that small size pancake-ish type thing with a pretty wide lens and see if I could use that between that and the 27, kind of like two little pancakes as my walk-around setup. I would be really stoked if I could get that to work for me. And then I have, yeah, no, that's it. Those are all the Fuji lenses that I currently have. Then everything else is everything telephoto lenses. They're all prime lenses that are Takumar. I have one Fuji, like old Fuji prime lens, like an M42 screw mount. It's like a 105. I think it's a 105, or is it 150? Good question. I have to think about that. No, I think it's a, no, it's not a 105. 200. It's a 200 millimeter. No, it's a 130. I'm sorry. I have a 130. It's a 130 like f 3.5, something like that. Or maybe it's 120. It's like 120 or 130 millimeter lens. It's old. Old as dirt, but it's a really beautiful, sharp lens. I love it, and I'm really interested to try it on the XE3, which I haven't done that yet. Tiff says, yeah, I feel the same way. That's the reason I'm holding out on my final video camera choice. I don't think they want to concentrate on video. They want to be the poor man's Leica. Very true. And as that poor man, I can say, yes, I am embracing that. Daniel Crotty asks, what lenses are you using on the XE3? I know you're into older manual focus ones at the moment. Yep, it's the two pancakes, 18 and 27. I haven't actually gotten the 18 yet. I'm still waiting for that to get here from Thailand. The 16, I haven't shot a bunch with the 16. It's been mostly 23 millimeter and 27 millimeter because that's just what I've had on. And I've done a little bit with some of the vintage lenses too, but I have not even tested my full vintage kit out on there, because like the telephoto lenses I think would be really fun to play with on the XE3. It would look weird because the lenses are going to be so much bigger than the body, but it would be, it's actually kind of interesting though, because you can throw, like those old vintage lenses, the tele lenses, they're long and skinny and they're made out of like lead and iron, and I mean they're very tough. Like you can throw one of those in your backpack without really worrying about it, like put it in a sock and throw it in your backpack so the lens doesn't get scratched. You don't have to worry about it getting messed up. And then just for a walk around for like basically a body cover lens, and just for general shootery, you know, put 27 on there and you can put it in your jacket pocket. Really, really easy to work with. But those are the lenses that I've been shooting the most with, really the 23 and the 27. Although I need to get the 16 out more. Hey, Dave Nevins from Tucson. Hey Dave, good to see you here. Glad to checking in. I have to say I'm a little bit, and by a little bit I mean very jealous of the fact that you were out in Tucson after freezing my fingers off last night while I was out shooting. That was just that was just a lot. Oh, Daniel Crotty was talking about video. I think maybe I got your question wrong. Oh, cool. Daniel got the Panasonic G7 for Black Friday, $500 new. It has everything you need. That is awesome for video. Yeah, and honestly, Daniel, don't be afraid to try that thing out for stills. I think you may be pleasantly surprised with, you know, it's not a bad little stills camera too if you put the right glass on it. And that's kind of really what I've come to the conclusion with. You know, it's like the hierarchy with my cameras has always been like, you know, the GH5 is the #1, and if that's the last camera I would ever get rid of is the GH5, and then there's, you know, my Fuji interchangeable lens, and then now the Fuji X100f, which previously that was inverted. It was Fuji X100f, and I got rid of the X-T2 because I didn't want the interchangeable lenses, but then I took advantage of my ability to change my mind like a rational human being, and you know, I just went that route and kind of flipped things around. Okay, let me see here. I gotta catch up. King Uzi says, other than the GH5, are there any other cameras with decent slow motion and 100 frames per second? Yeah, Sony RX10 Mark III, I think, and the RX100 Mark IV and 5, I believe, do that. But part of the problem is that on at least the Sony RX100 cameras, while they are capable of doing that, it is fairly squirrely to get in there. One of the things that makes the GH5 my one camera to rule them all, and you know, again, the last camera that I would get rid of, and I will give you some thoughts on the GH5S here in a moment, because I realize I skipped over that. One of the reasons why I love the GH5 so much is because you can use it for video and photos, and you can interchange between all of that stuff just like one click on the dial. Very easy. There's no like going into menus and fiddling around and changing this and going back out there and then changing the shutter speed, making sure that the aperture is right, and then, oh, you got to make sure the ISO, oh, you can't go into the ISO like that from here because this is all, like, there's all these different little things that when they pack these pro features into these little bodies, it sounds really good, because it's like, wow, here's a camera that you can put, you know, that's the size of a postage stamp that can, you know, shoot 4K at, you know, 120 frames per second and all this. Not that it really can shoot that way. I'm not, that's exaggerating, right? But when you pack that much into a body that little, you're always going to be trading something off, and a lot of it that you trade off is the comfort of the layout and the handling and the space. And so to that extent, having this camera that is small but not too small, large but not too large, and that is really appropriately designed so that you can go from shooting stills with that shutter speed, that setup, all done, all set, and then you can go to shooting 120 frames per second HD with the 240, you know, 40th of a second shutter speed, all set up. And then you can go to 60p at 4K, and then 60, and then like 4K at 24, or like Cine 4K 24p, and you can change between all of those modes with all of your additional settings dialed in. So it's like, oh, we're going to shoot a little slow-mo, click, boom, shoot. Like you can do it seamlessly as you're going along, and that makes such a big difference. When I was shooting the logging with my brother, you know, when I was down in Virginia, and you know, I've shown you guys this photo, these photos back here. You know, the one here with the tree falling. That was kind of a little experiment I was just shooting. I've been shooting a bunch of video, and I was like, well, I want to see if I can, you know, go from video to photo and drag the shutter in kind of one move, and I did, and that was one of the things where I was like, damn, this camera really can do everything that I need, and it does it in a way that isn't just a bunch of specs on a piece of paper that sound good, but the implementation of the specs are really good. And for photography, I don't think anybody does that better than Fuji. I think Fuji's implementation of their specs is what makes them really special, more so than the specs themselves. And again, that's why I always come back to that idea that specs are of limited value. It's the implementation and the layout of the camera and the way that it handles that really makes the big difference. Alright, let me see, where am I at here? Tiff says, I love my 56mm. I think it's pretty clean and crisp. Great bokeh. Yes, that's a very good question, Suresh, if you're still on here. The 56 is fantastic. I don't have that anymore because, for whatever reason, like big, beautiful portrait lenses, I have one of them. I have a Nikon 105mm f2, which is about twice the size and costs twice as much, and I am about half as likely to get rid of that. So that's like my one big, special, beautiful, sexy portrait lens, and that's a beautiful lens. But generally speaking, you know, even comparing that to the 56, which by Fuji, which is, I had the 56, but I sold it, and Tiff is absolutely right. It's a beautiful, beautiful lens. Really, really sharp and clean, and just beautiful. Beautiful lens. Yeah, I mean, I don't really think Fuji makes any bad lenses, honestly. Randy says he got the he said you got the X Pro 2, right? I feel like you got an X Pro 2 XE3. Thanks for pointing me previously. I guess it's important to get a camera that you feel good with. Randy said previously you mentioned when you hold the XE3 you don't feel like it's a workhorse, and I think you really made a good point on that. I'm holding a bigger and heavier camera than the XE3 with the X Pro 2, but I feel really good because the X Pro 2 compared to the XE3, it feels better in your hand. And yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of value to that when you just like the way that a camera feels. And, you know, there's only so light that you can go. And for me, I think that, you know, let's say Nat Geo came to me and were like, hey, we want to hire you to do, well, that probably wouldn't, I probably wouldn't even be able to, I wouldn't be able to afford to demonetize my videos if Nat Geo hired me, even, because I don't think they pay that well. But I would probably get an X-T2 or an X Pro 2 myself if I were going to be doing something that was a little bit more like, that would require the camera to be more durable. One of the things that I should have mentioned earlier, and I, excuse me, one of the things I didn't mention earlier that is not so great about this, the XE3, is that the tripod plate gets in the way of the battery door, and so if and when the battery does die, when you're out at night in the cold shooting, not only do you have to go through the fiddly process of dealing with the battery change, you have to deal with unscrewing the battery plate or the tripod plate, and so that's kind of a whole thing as well. I forgot to mention that. But yeah, the aesthetics of the camera, the way it feels in your hand, to me is really the big, you know, the most important thing to me anyways. Like that matters a huge amount. Daniel says, I sold my Sony gear this week and bought another Fuji camera, the X-T2. I'm over the moon because Sony was slowing me down in terms of settings, cost, autofocus for fast subjects. Welcome to the dark side, Daniel. I am glad. Hey, Ryan's here. Good evening, Ryan. Daniel says, my A7R2 missed the kiss and other important moments the last couple of weddings I shot, so it had to go. Having never shot the A7 or any of the any of the Sony cameras other than a couple of the RX100 cameras, and I love the RX100 cameras, but my experience with those cameras is that really the speed with which you can control what you need to control, and the speed and simplicity that come along with the Fuji cameras is worth any trade-off that there may be for everything that I've shot. Even in shooting weddings, and I've shot a few weddings, it's a good trade-off. Daniel says autofocus couldn't catch the kiss. I had it on continuous high and focus on the person with a single focus point. Last time I took a really blurry photo. Oh man, that's a bummer. That is a bummer. And I mean, I can't say that the Fuji will never do that or struggle in some of those circumstances as well, especially if the lighting is suboptimal. You know, that happens sometimes. But yeah, that can be very frustrating. And I mean, especially if you know, being perfectly realistic, like if you're going to have a camera that fails on you from time to time in that way, you may as well at least have a smaller, cheaper, lighter, easier to use camera. You know, because to me the whole point of having one of those big Sony cameras, not that they're big, the lenses I guess are a little bit bigger maybe, but the whole point of having the Sony cameras, as I understood it, was to have like this impeccable low light performance. And if the low light performance is still somewhat hit or miss, then you know you've kind of eliminated a lot of the reason to shoot with one of those cameras in the first place. Because you know, the Fujis are just really, they're a pleasure to use. Daniel says Fuji starts up very quickly. I can turn it on and shoot in about 1 second. The A7R2 took nearly 10 seconds. Wow, that is a lot. And Christopher Holiday says newest firmware is supposed to help with continuous autofocus. And Christopher, do you mean for the Sony? Or is there new firmware for the Fuji cameras that I'm not aware of? Because I know the last firmware update that I put in the X-T2 before it went the way of the buffalo yeah, for the XT2, that definitely helped a lot. And one of the things that I think I mentioned it in some of the other videos, and I'm going to edit it into the next video that I have to do about the XE3, is that the autofocus on this thing, and especially like the tracking autofocus, it is blazingly fast. And it really surprised me. And so my guess is that they probably just put in the XT2 what they have in the XE3, so now they're probably up to par. But using the XE3, the tracking and the autofocus speed were faster on this than they were on the XT2, even after its first firmware update, or like firmware, like, I don't know what the number was on it, but whatever, they had a major firmware update that improved the autofocus a lot, like about 6 months ago. And that did make a huge difference with the autofocus, but this was still faster, and the continuous autofocus and the face tracking was like brilliant. You know, the camera still struggles when you have subjects coming towards you and when you have subjects going away from you, but it's still, the ability to find the face and grab it and just like lock on was really impressive to me. And like anything going across the frame just tracked it beautifully. And I still haven't had to really adjust any of the settings, which maybe I should do that now. Just play with the autofocus settings. Autofocus, continuous settings. Yeah, let's see. Standard, accelerating or decelerating, erratically moving, decelerating subjects. Let me do that one. That will be fun. But yeah, the continuous tracking autofocus on the XE3 was beastly in a good way. I was very impressed with it. Alright gang, it has been 50 minutes. I know this live stream is a little bit shorter than what I typically like to do. However, I have a psych paper that I have to turn in by 11:59 tonight, and I cannot turn it in even a minute later. It will not be accepted, and that is 30% of my grade. I need to go and get after that. It has been a pleasure chatting with you guys. I am going to be in the Big Rotten Apple this weekend. I got my family in town. My father-in-law is over from Dubai. Hey, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate your appreciation. It's your appreciation is appreciated. Yeah, my father-in-law is going to be picking me up tomorrow. He's in town from Dubai, so I'm going to spend a little time down in the city with him and the family. So kind of excited for that. And then Monday and pretty much all next week I have tests. And then once I knock that stuff out of the way, I will have a little bit more free time, do more live streams, annoy you guys more, post more of video projects that I have, and I'll be looking forward to that. In the meantime, if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're interested in seeing some of my night photos that I've taken with the XE3, if you follow me on Twitter, I'm posting some of them over there. At Living Vertical. You can find me, interact with me there and anywhere. If you want to support this channel, it is Christmas time. If you do any of your Christmas shopping, and use the Amazon links down below here, even if you're not buying camera gear, just using those links to get into Amazon will still give me a little bit of support, help me run my channel. Please check out the documentary, The Banting's Ghost, Episode 1, if you haven't already. Thank you so much to you guys here, Yusuf and Tiff. I think are the only folks who are patrons who are on here right now. And if I'm forgetting anybody, then I'm a terrible person. And also my memory is terrible. But my patrons, you guys, you make this stuff possible. And like honestly, it's super humbling. I'm very grateful that you guys support the work that I'm doing, because it allows me to take this time to do this stuff, which means a lot to me, and it means a lot to me that it means a lot to you. Alright everybody, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. If you have questions, comments, anything like that, be sure to drop that below too. I will see you guys on the next episode of the Adventure Photo Show, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you guys on the Twitters, the Instagrams, all that stuff in between now and the next time I jump on the live stream, which will be maybe Monday if I have time, but don't hold your breath. It's probably going to be, you're probably not going to see or hear a lot from me on YouTube for the next week. Probably by next Friday, I should be in the clear and I should have a little bit more free time, but I will do my best. Photo challenge. Photo challenges are kind of on pause right now. I want to do some new photo challenges here, but I want to wait until I can actually like devote some time to it. I don't want to rush into it, and so I'm going to kind of just wait on that. I think probably once finals are over, like middle of December, what I want to do is kind of, do a couple of photo challenges through the Christmas season and kind of ramp that up into the new year. So it's a good idea, and I'm excited about it. I definitely want to continue doing those photo challenges. It's just like, I just want to make sure, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm notorious for biting off way more than I can chew. I mean, this weekend I had quizzes. I had I was helping one of my friends write a paper, finishing the documentary, editing. I went to see my family in Massachusetts, plus live stream here, plus posting on the website, plus social media. So I have a propensity to overload myself, plus I am sick a little bit. And so yeah, got a lot on my plate, but what I want to do is kind of let things sort out with the end of school, and then we're going to return to doing the photo challenges. So appreciate your patience, and I look forward to hearing from you guys, seeing you guys around in the very near future. All right, guys, have a good weekend.